Welcome back, everybody, to First Round Frenzy. Matt and Kole here. We're moving on with our divisional overviews. We're going with arguably the most competitive division over the past few years, and that is the AFC North. Now, it's one of the most violent divisions in all of football. Um, but this year, there is one team in particular that is not projected to be good at all. And they weren't good last year either. And Kole, that's the Cleveland Browns. But the rest of the division could potentially be very tight for a playoff spot.
Yeah, and I mean we're still going to see some more, stones fall in this division, if you will. I mean the Browns will talk about, have a big decision at the number two overall pick. What are they going to do at quarterback? Because Deshaun Watson's probably not going to step on the field if an ideal 2025 season takes place in Cleveland. You don't see Deshaun, and then 2026 you don't even have to mention his name anymore. So hopefully that's the case. And then with Pittsburgh, I mean, what are we going to do at quarterback there? Aaron Rodgers still holding a little carrot on a stick right over the Steelers fan base right now. Is he going to go there or not? So yeah, it's every game in this division is an absolute bloodbath, and I love the AFC North so much.
Yep. And then we obviously have the two front runners, the Bengals and the Ravens. Bengals obviously had their defensive issues last year, but new defensive coordinator, some draft picks, and hopefully they will be able to turn it around there. But let's get going. Kole, why don't we start with you? We're going to go in the order of the draft here. So we'll start with pick number 2 and the Cleveland Browns. Kole, let's get into it.
Yeah, so the Cleveland Browns, I mean, they were so much fun a year before and to 2023. I mean, when they went 11-6, Joe Flacco comes in late in the year off the couch and leads that team into the wild card. It was great. Things were, they weren't great. I mean, for the Cleveland Browns, but outside of it, looking in, it was great to watch the Browns resurge and get back into the playoffs. And then last year, it just all completely bottomed out. They brought in Jameis to be the backup. They lose Deshaun Watson to the Achilles tear, and then they go 3-14, horrible season out of Cleveland. And then they lose all their free agents. They had a big scrum with Myles Garrett. What was going to happen with him? He requested the trade. He wanted to go to a contender. They worked things out. He became at the time for at least a couple of days the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL
Yeah,
history.
yeah.
So it was great to get Myles Garrett back. It didn't really change anything other than having Myles Garrett back. I mean, I don't think it changed the discussion at number two. I mean, defensive end still on the board with Abdul Carter potentially being their guy, but still quarterbacks. What are they going to do there? So we'll see what happens. But Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski coming back into this fold. I think Stefanski's going to have a lot more input with the offense after, how bad it was last year. I think he takes the reins back this year, tries to get that unit on track, but we don't know what that identity is going to be yet. They don't have Nick Chubb anymore. I mean, he's still out there in free agency. They might bring him back. They might not. Jerry Jeudy's your number one wide receiver. You still got Njoku. And then again, no quarterback right now. I mean, Kenny Pickett out hopefully is not going to start the season in 2025. So a lot of questions still need to be answered by this Cleveland Browns offense going into this season.
Yeah, and it's not like the roster as a whole is even that bad in Cleveland when you look at it. I mean, the offensive line, it's not what it used to be, but it's still a very solid offensive line. Obviously, you lose Nick Chubb, could potentially still come back, but you get lucky. And with a very, very deep running back class in the draft, you could potentially replace him with a plethora of different guys. As you mentioned, Njoku, Jerry Jeudy took a huge step forward this past year and could legitimately be a wide receiver one. And then your defense with Myles Garrett, it is still very, very solid, and the secondary is good. So when you're looking at it as a whole, you're really missing a quarterback and then just belief. Like that's what you need. You're in this division with Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I mean, you're in a very tough division, and it's possible to get a playoff spot. You need to win your games in the division. We'll see what happens. Myles Garrett and potentially Abdul Carter would be hell for every single quarterback in there. Um, but they need to make a few moves if they want to not be back with a top 5 pick next year.
Yeah, and even their free agency was kind of a little wonky. I mean, you look at it, the guys they did bring in are a lot of retreads. Malik Collins at D tackle has been productive at times, but you don't know what kind of player he is now at this point in his career. Tevin Jenkins, former second round pick by the Bears, you don't even know where you're going to put him at. Is he, he's starting material, but you don't know where he's going to play. Jerome Baker, Devin Bush, Joe Tyron, all as well were top draft picks at one time that just never panned out to their draft status. So they're trying to, that defense and those additions outside of Tevin Jenkins, they're trying to get some guys in there that can rebound and, prove they still have what it takes to be a top player in the NFL. So I like that kind of energy and that hunger that's going to be on that defensive side of the ball. But this draft to me seems like an all offensive draft, and it's just whether or not that starts at two or whether you start building the offense after that point. But again, that quarterback's the real question mark. And Kevin Stefanski said at I think it was the combine, that his stance on the quarterback is that he needs to believe they can be a franchise quarterback and fit his system. Is that Shedeur Sanders? That's the question right now in Cleveland.
Speaking of question marks, the top part of this draft picks 1, 2, and 3. No one knows what's going to happen because no one knows who's taking a quarterback because all of a sudden the Titans are interested in Cam Ward and they're probably going to pick him. And now Shedeur Sanders might not even be a top 25 pick in the draft. So, and then some people are saying that 3 quarterbacks are going in the top 15. So,
Mm,
there's a lot of question marks here. Let's get right into it with the Browns. Your 3 round mock draft, starting with number 2 here. What do you have the Browns doing, or how do you have these first 3 laying out?
So, first of all, an interesting tidbit, doing some research. Andrew Berry has been the GM since 2020-ish. So he wasn't there the Baker Mayfield draft. He wasn't there the year after. I think 2020 is when he came in his first draft class. He's had 5 picks in the first or second round since then, and only Jedrick Wills Jr. has been an offensive player in the first 2 rounds of those 5 selections. And he is a pending free agent right now, and it's not looking like he's coming back. So this guy loves defense early on in the draft. And again, the question marks with Shedeur Sanders. I talked about it, on the QB breakdown episode. I don't know. I mean, there's confidence and there's arrogance, and you don't know if he's, him saying he can change a program around and change the culture of a team is confidence or arrogance. And while the Browns want to believe in a guy like that again, I don't think Shedeur Sanders is the one to bank your entire franchise on. So I'm taking Abdul Carter. Second overall, I think Cam Ward goes number 1. He's the best player available. I want to go, I've seen some mocks out there where they get Travis Hunter 2, they let Shedeur fall, and they trade back up in this first round and get Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. That could be cool, I guess, but you have to play it safe. I mean, Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders is not a safe bet by any means because you don't know really, if Shedeur can be the guy, and Travis Hunter, you don't know where he's going to play and if he's even going to translate great at either position at the next level. Abdul Carter is the best edge rusher in this class. You pair him up with Myles Garrett, that is a tremendous 1-2 punch, and you already have a great back end in the secondary as well. So I'm taking Abdul Carter, second overall. And then in the second round, pick 33. I'm going to go QB here. But I'm going to give some logic. They got Kenny Pickett. They traded for him. He's a good camp arm to have. They have Deshaun Watson, yes, but they're going to get off of him after 2025. I'm holding out hope for Kirk Cousins here. And I'm going to pair Kirk Cousins with a rookie in Tyler Shuck, second round, pick 33 out of Louisville. The buzz is rising on him. You're shaking your head. You
Yeah,
love
it
Tyler
is.
Shuck. I don't think he's not going to get in that first round category, but early second round, if people like him that much, I mean, you have him sit behind Kirk
especially
Cousins.
especially if Dart ends up going in the first round. That top
Yep.
top of the second round, there are a couple quarterbacks that could end up going there.
Yeah, and I think Shuck will be that fourth one off the list by the sounds of it. Is Kirk Cousins going to be happy if that's how that works out? Probably not. But that gives the Browns a couple of options at the position, which is, ultimately what they need to determine who their franchise QB is going to be. And then round 3, pick 67. Right now, I have Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, but I think some form of running back. Dylan Simpson also comes to mind out of Tennessee. But I think Caleb Johnson, fits that role of a do-it-all back like Nick Chubb was. And you get rid of the age concerns, the injury concerns with Nick Chubb, and get a similar style back in that offense to be that workhorse. I think Caleb Johnson can be an every down back for that team. And then round 3, go with a tackle, Emory Jones out of LSU. Just a sure up that right tackle position. You don't know what's going to happen with Jack Conklin long term. So bring in Emory Jones in the third round with that second pick in the third round. I think could be good for that Browns team. So that's my 4-pick, 3-round mock.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Abdul Carter is both of our number 1 players currently heading into the draft. And then at 33, it's your pick of quarterback, right?
Hmm.
We've talked about consistently how quarterback 4 through 10 are interchangeable because everybody has one at 4 and one at 10, right?
Yeah.
And it all depends on how they fall on your board. And if Tyler Shuck is the Browns' number 4 quarterback or higher, you never know. If he's your number 4 quarterback, you go and take him. And then after that, I like going offensive tackle with your fourth pick. I was kind
Hmm.
of going through this with some mock drafts that I was doing the other day, and I feel like there's a big gap between those first, early second round tackles and then everybody else. So it's kind of
Yeah.
hard to predict that end of second, early third. So it'll be interesting to see how they fall. But Emory Jones is kind of one of those candidates that are kind of in that end of day 2 conversation.
Yeah, and I like the guys like Jonas Avea, and then Ariante Essery, like we talked
Yep.
about. But I think those guys are going to be like the second round guys. So I think you get a better shot with one of those third round picks, getting Emery off the board there.
All right. Well, let's move to pick number 17, and that is the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals should be very good, but their defense decides to give up over 30 points a game. So that's an issue within itself. So I think you have an idea of how this mock draft at the end of this segment is going to go for them. But the Bengals obviously have made huge splashes so far in the offseason. Brought back their wide receiver duo of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins on massive contracts. Um, and they're currently in talks with their star edge rusher, Trey Hendrickson. So we'll see what happens there. But honestly, I've been pretty impressed with what the Bengals have been able to do after spending so much money on those two players and also potentially paying Hendrickson so much. They haven't necessarily gone out and gotten new players, but they've brought a lot of their returning contributors back. On the defensive side of the ball, maybe not the best idea, but on the offensive side, being able to bring back a Mike Gesicki is huge because having a pass catcher behind those two is important, and he was important down the stretch for them. But my one concern is they still haven't addressed the defense with anybody new. All they have done is brought in the new defensive coordinator, Al Golden, out of Notre Dame. I really like him. I thought he did a great
Yeah.
job at Notre Dame. We'll see how he translates to the NFL level here in this new age of defensive schemes. But, I think it's a good start. Their offense should be just as effective, if not more, than it was last year. But the defense is still a major isse for me.
Yeah, it's every year it's the defense and the offensive line. It's all you got to worry about in Cincinnati. And also like the run game too. Like they were adequate, without, after trading away Joe Mixon. I guess they're going to go with that Chase Brown as their running back one, and they didn't really bring in anybody else beside him in free agency. So I'm interested to see, how Brown does getting that full workload again for the second year in a row. Because I don't think he got hurt toward the end of the year, but I know that they traded and got Khalil Herbert in there and were trying to mix him in during, that second and after the trade deadline, right toward the end of the season. So the run game will be interesting, but I mean, a healthy Joe Burrow in that offense, they're going to be just fine on offense. I mean, they're the number one passing offense last year, and you got back T. Higgins, you got back Jamar Chase on long-term deals. Joe Burrow is a big reason why they broke out of that franchise trend and mindset to get those guys locked up. And Hendrickson now is, like you said, the big question mark because that helps out the defense a lot. And if you lose Hendrickson, then your defenses are really in trouble without the NFL sack leader.
Yeah. And I'm concerned about what the Bengals are going to do come next year. If the Steelers are able to get a competent quarterback, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or whether it's someone in the draft that ends up playing out where they trade for Kirk Cousins or, whatever it ends up being, that Steelers defense is good enough to get second in this division.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything. If it's a mediocre quarterback, they will be able to get second in this division. So I think the Bengals need to have a very, very good draft this year to be able and get starting capable players at key positions. So I think with only 6 picks in this draft, they have 6. So they need to make these count. I don't think they have the capital to be able to trade up. I think maybe they can trade up once. Maybe we get a fourth into a third. But I don't see anything more than that. For me, I just went with the picks that they have. I just don't see it happening. But they need to make those picks count. We'll see what happens. Um, Obviously, they're probably going to go defense with at least two of these first three picks. I could definitely see them going all three. But offensive line and pass catcher are also a major need for them going into here.
Yeah, and you look back at, the history of how this team drafted since 2022 when they went Dax Hill and then Cam Taylor Britt in the first two rounds. And then next year, first three rounds, they go defense. Miles Murphy, DJ Turner, Jordan Battle. And then the first three last year rounds, they do two defensive guys and then a tackle and a wide receiver. I mean, Jermaine Burton hasn't really panned out, but they needed a tackle in the first round and got Armarius Mims, but then got Chris Jenkins on the D line and McKinley Jackson on the D line. So they really, I mean, when your defense is bad, you got to prioritize hitting big, and to hit
Yep.
big, you got to get those guys early on in the draft on the defensive side of the ball. So I agree. It seems like that might be a similar trend in this year as well.
All right, so let's go right into it. Round one, pick 17. I go with one of my favorite skilled players in this draft, and that's James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. He's going to stay in the orange. And, this is huge because if they don't keep Trey Hendrickson, they need someone to be productive on the pass rush. And I think James Pierce is one of those guys that can translate immediately to the next level. We know they're not going to get Abdul Carter. That it's not going to happen. He's not going to drop, despite the hand concerns or the foot concerns, whatever it was, by the combine. But James Pierce is, we've talked about it before. James Pierce has the potential to be a better pass rusher than Abdul Carter. He can be the best pass rusher coming out of this class. And I think we've talked about potential character concerns, and he had a little bit of a dip from his 2023 to 2024. This guy still had 7.5 sacks this past season in a very good Tennessee team against SEC competition, the guys that you're going to be
Yep.
playing against at the NFL level. So when I see James Pierce Jr., you're either creating a big time duo in him and Hendrickson, or you're getting the replacement that could be a 10 plus sack guy for the next decade. Now, at round two, I'm going to reunite new defensive coordinator Al Golden with his star defensive back, and that's Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. Benjamin
Nice.
Morrison, I've been talking about him forever.
Yep.
He's my number 22 player in this class, but the consensus, they around 42, 43. And there's four corners pretty much at consensus in a row. Him, Trey Amos, Azariah Thomas, and Shavon Revel. So we expect them to kind of be in that 40 to 55 range, most likely, come draft day. So one of those corners is going to get there. For me, I'm going to go Benjamin Morrison. I think he has the least first round hype out of the four that I just mentioned. So he's most likely to drop. As you know from my rankings, I think he's a lockdown corner. He's a number one. He can play on the outside. He can guard anybody. We saw him absolutely dominate Marvin Harrison Jr. In 2023 in that tape against Ohio State. So I think if you get him, you're getting an absolute steal there. And then round three, I go with one of my favorite players in the draft, Ty Robinson. Snuck into my top 50. He's right around consensus 100 in most people's players. So it's a little bit of stretch here, but I think you need help on that interior of the defensive line. I was considering going offensive tackle, but at 81, I think it's a little rich for anybody that's currently there, unless someone drops from higher up. And we already got an edge rusher, so I think you go to the interior. I was also considering safety as well, but the only one I was going for this high would be Makuba, but I think he's probably going to go earlier than 81. But Ty Robinson, he's a huge time disruptor, both run game and pass rush. And I think that's going to be a huge need filled for the Bengals.
Yeah, I love Pierce, especially if they keep Trey Hendrickson. Those two paired up together be two really good, strong edge rushers. And Benjamin Morrison, like that might be his range in
Yeah.
that second round because that hip injury was killer for him. And it's what's knocked him down boards, and it's been a very trying time for him and a roller coaster of a process because he looked like a first round lock at one point. And if that injury's, checks out and he's good, I think that's a steal.
Oh,
Like we talked about, the production and level of of player he can be at that position is going to be huge for him to be a day one starter, in my opinion. Looking at the corners I just talked about, Cam Taylor Britt, DJ Turner, and Dax Hill, all recent draft picks. I think Benjamin Morrison is better than all three of those guys. So you can just start him right away on the outside. And then, yeah, Ty Robinson, that gets a good interior defensive line as well, because you already have BJ Hill You got Chris Jenkins, who I mentioned earlier, McKinley Jackson, and they brought in TJ Slayton. So that's a solid, interior rotation when you add in, a very athletic guy like Ty Robinson from what we saw at his combine was really good athlete. So that's pretty solid and kind of like I said, that's what they need to be doing. Three straight defensive players probably to start this draft would be what should be the expectation.
And I think the third round pick is something that could potentially go a different way depending on who's available on the board. We've talked about offensive line has always been an issue for the Bengals. So if they really like someone there, maybe that's a pick. And also that wide receiver 3 is a question mark as well. So if they really like someone, then that could be the pick as well. But I think edge, corner, and interior defensive line should potentially be the picks here for the Bengals.
Mhm.
So
I
let's
mean,
move on. Yeah, we'll see. But let's
I was
move
gonna say,
on.
could they be a Jaden
Yeah,
Higgins team, maybe
it
potentially?
could be. I mean, I don't know if Higgins fall. I think you'd have to get him in round 2, if anything.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know if he fall. I'm hearing first round hype for him now, like end of first round. Like I don't know. Some people have him over Luther Burden. Some people have him over some of these guys. And if
that's
that
fair.
team is there, I think round 2 would probably be where he has to go. But if he dropped to 81, I could totally see that being the case.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think we all know what they need right now. It might not happen in the draft, but we all know what they need because right now they do not have someone that's going to throw the football to their newly acquired DK Metcalf or their resident diva, George Pickens. So, Kole, let's have you go through this here. What's going on with Steelers and what do they need to do?
Um, FaceTime Aaron Rodgers, because apparently that's the only way you can get a hold of him as a Packers fan. I know that firsthand. FaceTime, try to ask him if he can step out of a cave and get some signal, maybe get a hold of him. Because if they can't get Rodgers, this team is screwed. I mean, if you can't land Rodgers at this point, you're hoping Jackson Dart falls to 21. And then you're going to risk another quarterback in the 20s. That didn't work out with Kenny Pickett. So I'll just say that much. But
Steelers fans are about to have PTSD if that happens.
whatever the case may be, I know for a fact this team's winning 9 football games next year. I don't care who's under center. Mike Tomlin will will this team to 9 wins and get above 500 because that's all he does. I mean, you look at it 12-4, 9-7-1, 9-8, 10-7, 10-7. This guy's getting above 500 and getting to the wild card and no further because that's Pittsburgh Steelers football lately. So we'll see what happens. I love the move of DK Metcalf, though. I mean, as long as him and George Pickens don't fight each other on the field, that trade's going to work out perfectly for this team. And then I like some of the other moves. I mean, Mason Rudolph is a very reliable backup who knows, he doesn't know Arthur Smith's offense, but he knows the locker room. He knows Steeler football. He'll pick up on it. Darius Slay was a good pickup at corner. That gives you another outside guy and a veteran behind Joey Porter Jr. And then Brandon Eccles is good depth there, too. So we'll see what happens, but I'm still concerned about running back too. And I'll talk about it a little bit later because I don't know if Jalen Warren is. I mean, they never really gave him a chance. Everyone wanted him. Fantasy owners wanted Jalen Warren, RB1. And are we really going to get that in 2025 after we haven't got it the last couple of years? Now that they let Najee Harris walk in free agency, we'll see what happens. But I mean, this team, if they get the quarterback situation right, they can be right in there, I think, as one of the contenders in the AFC, especially if it's a healthy Aaron Rodgers under center.
I mean, we saw it last year. What was going on at quarterback all year? I mean, I'm hoping Justin Fields plays really well as a Jets fan, but I mean, he just ran the ball. He didn't do much outside of
Yeah.
that. Maybe that's because they just had George Pickens and that was it. But I mean, yes, they were 6-2, but he didn't do much. That was all defense. And then Russ comes in and plays, I mean, better than he did with Denver, but not by much. And they end up making the playoffs because the Bengals decide to let off 30 points a game. But yeah, they're in a big trouble right now. I think quarterback is definitely someone that's going to be taken at some point in this draft. Whether it ends up being Jackson Dart, whether it ends up being a Will Howard or a Tyler Shuck or something like that, or they wait until day 3 and go for it.
Mm.
But Rodgers is top priority right now because I mean, the Giants are taking all of them. They might take Rodgers at this point as well. You never know what the Giants are doing. So we'll see. But Steelers, they need a quarterback.
I mean, yeah, if Rodgers is off the table and you're not going to trade for Kirk Cousins, who's the best option out there? Joe Flacco? Ryan
Hey, he brought
Tannehill?
people to
If you,
he brought the Browns to the playoffs.
I mean, hey, Joe Flacco throwing the ball to George Pickens and DK Metcalf, that would be fun football. Mike Tomlin will be freaking out, but that would be exciting. But yeah, it has to be Aaron Rodgers or bust, in my opinion, for this team, and you just have to hope Aaron Rodgers is still that guy. So we'll see what happens. But in terms of the draft, yes, Jackson Dart is an option, but I'm looking at that wide receiver 3 spot because the wide receiver room was horrible behind George Pickens. When George Pickens wasn't having a 100-yard game with a touchdown, like they were getting no production from that offense. So they brought in DK Metcalf. That's going to help, but he's, still a downfield, more of a physical presence than Pickens, but still a downfield guy. You need an underneath guy within this offense. So I'm looking at some guys here in the draft and in the first round. I keep circling back to Emeka Ibuka. So I don't know if we want to go ahead and jump into the mock
Yeah,
draft, but
go for it. Go for it.
all right, that's who I have right now. I got Emeka Ibuka, 21 to the Steelers. I think he's the ideal slot and complement to DK Metcalf and George Pickens in this offense. And we all know if you look back at the scouting process in the first round, Mike Tomlin always personally meets with the player he selects, and he just had an exclusive dinner with Emeka Ibuka. So that got my radar up. And the other thing with Omar Khan is he likes bigger schools, high character guys, and also seniors. Looking back at some of his, first 3 round guys. So I took that into account with the rest of this. But there's only 2 picks here. They don't have a second round pick because they traded for DK Metcalf. So they just have that first overall or first round pick, 21st overall, and then the 83rd overall pick in the third round. So with that pick, I'm going to go and address the defensive side of the ball. They have some great players over there. I talked about Joey Porter Jr. already. We got TJ Watt, who every year is going to be in the running, leading the league in sacks. Alex Highsmith's great on the opposite side as well. And then I want a guy in the interior. And I was going back and forth between Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee and Joshua Farmer out of Florida State. But Joshua Farmer is the one they met with. They haven't met with Omar Norman Lott. So as much as I like that fit, they haven't met with him yet. And Omar Khan and, like I said, Mike Tomlin like meeting with the guys they draft. So that brings me around to Joshua Farmer to get an interior presence out of Florida State. I think that just checks all the boxes of, their tendencies.
Yeah. And you know me, I love Emeka Ibuka. He's my wide receiver 1 currently, and I do think that's a great fit for Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
As good as DK Metcalf and George Pickens are, everybody kind of knows what their personalities are like. And, they can be a little wild sometimes and they can be a little violent, we'll say, on and off the field. And just, that's just what they're like. And you're going to need someone that's a leader and someone that's going to just be a pro's pro, right? And that's Emeka Ibuka. And, we've talked about the tendencies. He fits that perfectly. I think he's a guy that can run an entire route tree despite only really being kind of like that short and intermediate kind of guy at Ohio State. I think that's mostly because, they've had Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Chris Olave, all around him. He didn't need to be that guy. But I think he's someone that could end up being a wide receiver 2 somewhere, or potentially being a wide receiver 1 kind of guy if he wasn't in Pittsburgh. So really like that fit. And then, yeah, Tomlin's always going to go defense. He needs his defensive guy. He needs someone that's going to disrupt play. He definitely needs someone if they're not going to have a quarterback this year because they're going to have to hold people to negative points somehow. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think Omar Norman Lott, he's a guy that I was really high on beginning of the process. Joshua Farmer, obviously extremely physical. So I think they definitely go with that. But one thing is for sure, his son is going to get drafted at some point later on at wide receiver, and they're really going to improve that wide receiving core.
Yeah, and I mean this team could get weird. And by weird I mean Jackson Dart 21 could be weird if he's there. Omarion Hampton, if he falls to 21, that could be
Yeah.
weird because I mean you don't have a second round pick, and that's the big run at running backs we all know is going to be in that second round. So if they want to add someone to complement Jalen Warren in this offense at that running back position, Omarion Hampton makes sense. But also you look at the list, they also met with Dylan Sampson. They met with DJ Giddens. They met with Ollie Gordon. They met with Jaden Blue, who are all like day three guys. So they got their eyes on some running backs there that aren't going to be the day two options. And then if they go with Jackson Dart first round, and you're still looking for that second or that number three wide receiver, they met with Jalen Noel, Savion Williams, and Jaden Higgins as well. So, like I'm saying, like this team usually sticks to the guys they visit with are the guys they select. So it's pretty obvious looking at those names that those are the positions they're looking at, trying to fill out a late round running back to that offense, and at some point get one of these, either Emeka Ibuka in the first round or a third round guy to be your wide receiver three, based on how I'm reading this.
All right, so now let's move on to the Baltimore Ravens, the team that, out of all of these guys, has the least amount of holes. They might not even have any holes on this team necessarily. They're very well put together. Eric Costa does a great job every single year. And once again, I think they've started very well in free agency, right? They lost a few players, probably most notably Brandon Stevens. He didn't play extremely well last year, but he was technically their third corner on that team. But they came in and they replaced him with Chidobe Awuzie. I mean, he's a very, very good, I think, potential upgrade, at least on actual ability to play. We'll see what happens. I'm personally hoping Brandon Stevens plays very well this year. We paid him a lot of money, but I think Chidobe Awuzie is a very good replacement there. Then obviously you re-sign some key players in Ben Cleveland, Patrick Ricard, Ronnie Stanley, Tylan Wallace as well. Wide receiver four. So another big re-sign there. And I think the highlight here is they bring in DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins, to me, has a very boomer bust kind of feel here for this. I think we all know the Ravens are going to be good. They're going to make the playoffs. That's just what they do. Lamar Jackson's going to Lamar Jackson and make it happen. But DeAndre Hopkins is a guy, at least personally, when I'm looking towards the draft and what they could potentially do, I think wide receiver is a position that I think they're definitely going to be looking at early on. Maybe not round 1 or 2, but definitely on that round 3 radar, because DeAndre Hopkins hasn't been the same guy over the past 2-3 years, right? He's had his ups and downs, and I think he's really a stopgap. And when I look at the Baltimore Ravens, I'm looking at Zay Flowers, who is a very, very good wide receiver. You're looking at Rashad Bateman, who had a much better 2024, but he's still very inconsistent. He drops passes, and he's really only a deep threat for a majority of the time. Most of his production comes 20-plus yards down the field, which is a great weapon to have, but as a wide receiver too, I'm not so sure. And with the uncertainty of how DeAndre Hopkins is going to affect this offense, I think wide receiver is definitely something to look at. But other than that, we're going to be looking at offensive line. We're going to be looking at some edge rushers and potentially some linebackers as well.
Yeah, this is going to be a very physical and aggressive football team again, just like they were last year. They're going to, pound absolutely down the middle with Derrick Henry and just absolutely demolish with a run game and a stout defense. So we'll see what that passing game looks like. D-Hop's going to be a big boost. If he can, he's not going to be D-Hop of old, but if he can just be a reliable, big time weapon for that offense, can you just take some pressure off Zay Flowers? That's going to help out a lot. And we'll see what happens out of Mark Andrews, because he's got to, bounce back after the end of his season, because that was a rough blowout for him. But we'll see. I like the other tight end they got as well. I'm trying to
Isaiah Likely.
Isaiah Likely, yes.
Yep.
Coastal guy. Yeah, I like Likely, and getting him involved, more would be cool and beneficial to that offense. But Mark Andrews, I think he bounces back next year. He's got to prove himself after how that season ended. But the Ravens are fun. As much as I don't like Lamar Jackson, you can't not like watching Lamar Jackson play football, because it's so much fun to watch how he can just take all like demoralize an entire defense every single given play. So they're going to be fun. They just got a couple pieces to fill in there, and just try to get over that hump and be able to beat the Chiefs and beat the Bills in the AFC is pretty much the only thing standing in their way of a Super Bowl.
Yeah. And I think first of all, you talk about Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. I think the Ravens have the best tight end room in the entire country. I'm still a huge believer in Charlie Kohler out of Iowa State.
Yeah.
and he's just sitting behind their tight end three, not getting any playing time. Elite weapon, so watch out for him. But on the defensive side of the ball, I think the biggest needs are probably edge and secondary. We've talked about it a lot. I mean, their edge rushers are good. Obviously, some very notable names there, but they need some depth. And then secondary, I mean, they've been kind of using Kyle Hamilton at a position. They've been using him more as a deep lying safety rather than his, ideal position is kind of like a wild card kind of player. He's a Swiss
Hmm.
Army knife is
Yeah.
probably the word to use. Guy that can be in the box, play in the slot. You want to use him in specific situations in different places. But because of the lack of depth, especially at the safety position in particular, they weren't really able to do that. Hopefully they bring back Ardarius Washington, who had a very good, at least, end of the season last year. But again, he's more of a guy that you're going to want to be versatile, guy that can play up top, but also in the slot. So when I'm looking at the Ravens, when I was making this mock draft, which we'll get into in a minute, I was definitely looking at safeties and corners here. And I think that's a position that, they brought in Awuzie, but I still think that's going to be a position of a lot of questions. Nate Wiggins, good rookie year. Can he keep it going? Marlon Humphrey, obviously. Sorry, not Marlon Humphrey. Marcus
Yeah.
Peters. Marlon Humphrey, yeah, sorry. Marlon Humphrey had a bounce back year this past year, played much better. So, we'll see what happens. But I definitely think on the defensive side of the ball, the secondary is going to be the biggest area of concern for them.
Yeah, and keeping left tackle Ronnie Stanley was huge. Paying him right before free agency because he was about to get the bag from either the Chiefs or the Patriots. So keeping him in, I mean, that shores up your offensive line. I really like Roger Rosengarten,
Yep.
Daniel Falele, Andrew Voorhees are all of my draft guys. And then they got Tyler Linderbaum early in the draft at center. Like their offensive line, I think is pretty set. So, I mean, they're going to power through some teams, like I said,
Yeah.
with that run game and that offensive line in front of them. So yeah, I agree. It's just filling out those defensive holes. I mean, safety is a big one. Like you said, edge, another pure edge rusher will be good for that defense. So we'll see what they can do and what moves they can make. I mean, David Ojabo didn't really pan out. Odafe Owe hasn't really panned out. And Adisa Isaac, we loved him
Yep.
coming out of the draft, and he didn't really pan out this past season as well. So they need a surefire guy off that edge too that can dominate some teams on defense.
Yep. All right, so let's get right into it then. They have the 27th pick in the first round, the 59th pick in the second round, and the 91st pick in the third round. Now, I just went straight up. I did those picks. I would not be surprised if they end up trading up and getting another pick in this range, or potentially moving up one of their two picks in the second or third round. Because currently, on top of these three picks, they hold 2 4th-round picks, a 5th-round pick, 4 6th-round picks, and a 7th-round pick in this draft. So we always talk about, I feel like I mention this every episode, they 20 to 75, that ish range is the heart of this draft. That is where the most talent is and the most depth. So if they want to do it and they want to get some more notable edge rushers, maybe a corner, maybe another offensive lineman to sit behind some of the guys that they have there, because although the starters are very good, they don't have much depth. So definitely keep an eye out on that because they are definitely a team that could be moving around in that second, third round range. So just keep in mind there. But let's get right into it. 127, Nicky Manwari, safety out of South Carolina. Now, you and I have him very, very high up on our big boards. Really, really a big fan of his talent. But based on the consensus, I'm still seeing him in that bottom third of the first round. Some people have him to the Vikings. Some people, Mike Tannenbaum had him 31 to the Chiefs. So, that is seeming like, as of right now, that seems like his range, 24 to 32. I don't think he's going to get to 30, 31, 32, but I think that 24 to 28 range is probably where he's at. There's still time for him to rise up, but I think with him and Malachi Starks being so close together in terms of talent-wise, I think a lot of teams are kind of like, all right, we can kind of sit off, fill some other needs, and potentially get these guys later on, maybe trade back into the first round. So I think there is a possibility that he's going to be available here. And this allows for Kyle Hamilton to really play his role in this team. Get down on the line of scrimmage, be an absolute menace in the run game, potentially play in the slot a little bit. And then when you need two high safeties, he can be up there to support Nicky Manwari. But his athletic abilities make so much sense here. Malachi Starks, I think, is more of a, down low guy playing the slot. whereas Nicky
Mhm.
Manwari can be that man up top and just absolutely destroy uh, up there.
Yeah.
Pick two at round 259, I've got one of my favorite players in the draft, and that is Josiah Stewart, edge out of Michigan. Obviously, as I said, I have him at 25 on my big board. Consensus is around 70. So this would be a little bit of a reach potentially. But I think with the Baltimore Ravens, what Eric DeCosta loves to do is get their guys, right? They want a guy that's going to absolutely dominate on the field, wants to develop, wants to do well. And that's what Josiah Stewart's going to do. We've talked about it before when we were talking about edge rushers and also when we were doing our big boards. He had the highest pass rush win rate in all of college football last season. He's extremely aggressive. He's powerful. He can finesse. He's quick. And just so happens that their head coach's brother coached him at Michigan. So I think, if you're John Harbaugh just coming off of a new 3-year extension here, why not go out and get one of your brother's guys from college who is coached well, coached, and is going to be able to translate to the next level. So I think Josiah Stewart kind of fills out that edge need and could potentially be a day one starter for them at the 59th pick. And then finally, in round 3, pick 91, this is one that I was kind of debating over what I wanted to do. I feel like there's a lot of options here, a lot of different positions as well. But I went Savion Williams, wide receiver out of TCU. I think he's a really interesting player. We've talked about him a lot. He's currently in my top 15. I haven't really determined top 15 wide receivers. I haven't really determined the order for like 7 to like 20.
Yeah.
It's very jumbled in there, but he's in my top 15. And he's a guy that can play inside as a slot. He can play outside. Got a great catch radius. He's extremely athletic. He can be great in contested catch situations. And the reason why I went with him over some other guys is because I think he can bring a whole new dimension to this already insane offense in Baltimore. Imagine him lining up Wildcat or lining up in a split backfield with Derrick Henry. Is Lamar going to throw it? Is Lamar going to run it? Is he going to hand it off to Derrick Henry? Is he going to hand it off to Savion Williams? I mean, it just brings in a whole new dynamic. And I think that's what they love to do with their offense is confuse people, make people think. And then all of a sudden, even if he doesn't get the ball, someone else is going to be wide open because they were thinking about something else. So I think
Mhm.
Savion Williams would be a really interesting joker to put into this offense.
Yeah. So the way I look at it, Nicky Manroy, and him and Kyle Hamilton, that's like the way the modern safety duo is going. Because
Yep.
before you would have your free safety and your strong safety. Now you're just having two hybrid safeties. And
Yep.
you can just confuse the coverages, mix either player up high, down low. So that would work out insanely well because that's like two similar style players in Kyle Hamilton and Nicky Manroy who can do that at a high level and play over top or down at the box. So that'd be incredible to have two of those guys in your back end. And then Josiah Stewart, the one thing you didn't mention is they were saying he was like the best leader on that Michigan
Yep.
defense, which was full of very well coached, highly respected, high culture players. So that's like again something Harbaugh was going to say to the other Harbaugh to get him in Baltimore if the Chargers don't take him or someone else beforehand. So
Yep.
that'd be a great, leader off your edge like I was talking about. And then Savion Williams, I like his frame too. I mentioned him when I brought up the Buffalo Bills and the 3-round mock they had because I had him with the second round pick for the Bills. But we'll see what happens with his range because we talked about that wide receiver day 2 range is going to be interesting of which teams grade the wide receivers the highest. But Savion easily can fall like anywhere in that range, like that 60 to 90 range. So we'll see what happens with him and which offense he ends up with in the two AFC contenders if he goes to
Yep.
the Bills or goes to the Ravens. I think I like the fit on both teams. Like you were saying, you can use him anywhere with that offense and make it explosive. And good luck trying to game plan against all those guys if he ends up in Baltimore. I'll just say that.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like the Ravens are a team that's just very interesting, especially in this day 2 range. Because as I said, they can move up, they could add another day 2 pick as well, just based on the capital that they have. But there are some other needs that I didn't address here, right? We talked about corner as potentially you might need another corner as your cornerback 3, cornerback 4, kind of in that range. We're looking at linebacker. Do you go for a guy like Chris Paul Jr. or Demetrius Knight with a second or third round pick? Right? You don't really have that off ball linebacker, to sit in that middle of the defense there. And then obviously offensive line. We talked about it. Do you go after a guy like, Aaron to Ursary in the beginning of the
Hmm.
second round or Josh Connerly? Or are you going to wait and go after a Ozzy Trapillo at early day 3, right? So I think there's a lot of options here for the Ravens. It'll be interesting to see if they trade up or if they trade back and accumulate more assets for later on, if they feel comfortable with how the draft's going and how their team's looking. But I definitely expect some movement for them. I wouldn't be surprised if they add another pick here and get one of those guys that I just mentioned at linebacker, corner, or offensive line.
hmm They got couple different options, and that's just the mark of a well-built team. And what you were saying earlier about the trade up, it'll be interesting. Like you look at DeCosta's draft classes, he had 9 picks last year, and then in 2022 he had 11 picks. So he also likes getting a lot of rookies in, and that's how you fill out those final spots on a really good roster is you just have a good class of rookies to choose from, and you pick and choose who makes it out of that class and who doesn't. So we'll see if he gives up some picks now as he continues to build up that roster and to get the pieces in place. Maybe now's the time to trade up. So we'll see what his tendency is this year and if he tries to switch up on that or if he goes on another, big class coming in
Yeah.
of rookie players.
Yeah. So that is the AFC North. So, Kole, as we always end with these, what what do you expect out of this division? Who's number one? Who's the biggest riser? Who's the biggest faller? Or is this going to be the exact same as last year?
Yeah, so I'll start with the Browns. I don't know that they'll find much more success, even if they solidify a quarterback at some point, if it's a rookie, if it's Kirk Cousins, if it's Kenny Pickett, if it's
Yeah.
Deshaun Watson and you throw him back in for whatever reason. I don't think you find much. I mean, maybe you get to 6 wins with a new quarterback. You add 3 more wins to their win total. I don't see much improvement out of that Browns team right now, which is probably going to infuriate Myles Garrett if he
Yeah.
has to go through another year of that after signing that big deal. I think the Ravens come out on top. Like I said, they're just built top to the bottom, and they're going to be a dominating presence, and they're going to dominate teams during the regular season like they always do. And then between the Steelers and Bengals, it's a toss-up, but I can see both teams getting into the playoffs as wild card teams. I think the Steelers get, established quarterback in there, whether it's Jackson Dart, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, they have all the pieces and the coaching to get them into a playoff spot. And then the Bengals, it just comes into can they outscore opposing teams? Can they
Yeah.
score 35 points a game and come away with 10 wins? And I think with the healthy Joe Burrow, they can do that. So I could see three playoff teams coming out of this division in 2025.
Yeah. For me personally, I think obviously Browns are going to be at the bottom of the division. I think there's a chance that they improve. I expect them to have a top five pick next year. Which means they could potentially get another quarterback. I mean, we've talked about how deep the quarterback class is next year potentially. So
Mhm.
that if they don't go Shador, we'll see what happens. But I expect them to have a top five pick. The Steelers, I think I probably have finishing third. I'm still very concerned about their quarterback position. Aaron Rodgers is still somewhere in the darkness, and we don't know if he's ever coming out. So we'll see what happens there. They will go over 500. I agree with you. I think there's a very good chance that all three of these teams make it into the playoffs. And then it comes down to the Bengals. I think there is a good chance that they come out on top of this division. I think there is. If Al Golden can do his magic, come up with something good, draft some good defensive players that can be immediate impact players, if they can do that, I think they have the pieces to still be successful. I think it's going to come down to the season series, though.
Yeah.
I think if the Bengals can somehow win most of their divisional games, I
hmm
think they will come out on top of the division. But based on how it stands, I think it's going to be Ravens up top once again, Bengals number two, but both teams make the playoffs. So we'll see what happens, but it should be a competitive division.
Yeah, and that's what makes this division so fun is you talk about it coming down to the division games, and that's how it always is in the AFC North. You have a chance that all four teams could be, pretty decent and be wild card. Three could be wild card teams, and whoever comes out on top as the division champ. The Browns haven't quite been able to find their way back up to that level yet, but I mean they Browns could still steal a game against Cincinnati or steal a game against Pittsburgh next year, and find all the right cylinders in one any given Sunday. So and then for the other teams, they're going to absolutely demolish each other, back
Yeah.
and forth. Like it's going to be a battle over who comes out on top anytime there's an AFC North matchup. So that's going to be a very fun division once, late season football and trying to determine playoff seeding comes into it for this division.
Yep. All right. Well, on Thursday, we will have the NFC North, another very competitive division over the past few years. So, with the Bears potentially moving up, making some big moves, and the Packers still needing a wide receiver one, we'll, we'll see what happens. But we will be here on Thursday to discuss that. So we will see you then.